Hey everyone. So welcome to our session. So integrating backup into your GitOps, your CI/CD pipelines or workflows, depending on what program or what software you're using. So before we kick in and get into it, let me just quickly introduce myself. I'm Michael Cade. I'm a senior global technologist at Kasten by Veeam, and over the last 8 9 months, I've really been focused on DevOps, Kubernetes, and the world around Kasten K10, so data management around Kubernetes and everything that goes and builds up into that. And I think I'm on a similar learning curve to a lot of us out there that are taking those first steps into our DevOps learning journey. And I came up with this session based on KubeCon and how a lot of people are now looking at, or the familiarization of having your code, like having a code repository, your application, and then having a stateful workload that contains obviously some data services, whether it be databases, NoSQL, SQL, batch processing, etc. But how easy it is to potentially manipulate that data via code, thus potentially causing an issue if something was to go wrong. So it's all well and good for us to have that conversation about, oh, it's absolutely fine. Everything I'm doing is in code, so I've got that in my code repository. I've got that in my GitHub repository. Awesome stuff. Yep, you're covered. Until you make a config change or a code change that affects the actual data service. So that's really what the premise of this session is about. Couple of slides really to paint a picture of what I'm going to show in the demo, but then we'll get into the demo and I'll walk through actually an example that I have out there as well in my GitHub repository where everyone should be able to go and walk along this route. Now, the software I'm using is just simply put that is what I was familiar with, or what that I learned on. This can translate into many other different CD tools, not so much the CI, and I'm going to get into that in the first slides, but really I'm using the tools that I'm aware of, but obviously there's a lot more out there. So without further ado, let's jump into the slides. Now, there's two elements to this. So from a CI/CD pipeline, it'll really depend on where you are within your learning journey here. Obviously, there's continuous integration, and this is more for the software developer. You're creating an application or an app that you're constantly evolving, you're updating, you're refreshing, and then you're offering that out into a container registry or some sort of repository that your users can then take advantage of, or at least your customers maybe can take advantage of. And I'm not really going to touch on this too much because this is really this is my app, and this is what I'm updating. And from a stateful workload point of view, there's generally not going to be any data service at this point. So you're going to create your code, you're going to source control that using Git, you're then going to build that, you're then going to test it, and then you're going to release that. And then we get version 1, 2, 3, 4 of that product, or of that package, of that project, out available on a registry or repository somewhere. Where I really want to focus on is around the release. And what I mean by the release is when it gets into the continuous deployment or the continuous delivery of that application. So whether we get from version 1 to version 2 of that code piece, and then so on and so forth, and delivering that and deploying that out into our clusters, our environments. And now in this instance, I'm using Kubernetes as my target environment, and I will typically have a staging, but I'm just going to go straight with one cluster, Kubernetes cluster, as the premise to us integrating backup into, or integrating data management into our workflows, as here down the bottom. So the need for backup, or the automated way of being able to put that safety hoop into our workflow, into our CD pipelines. So obviously we're going to be leveraging the code repository Git. We're going to be leveraging GitHub in my example. I'm going to be using Argo CD, and we're going to deploy our application, which is all great. and everything works that way. If you've only got a web server and that's the way you want to deliver version 1, version 2 of your web application, great. If there's no stateful workload in there, then okay, that's fine. And also a consideration is that you're already taking care. If that application does have stateful workloads, you may also have a third-party integration into something like Kasten K10 where you're already protecting those. However, what about when you go from version 1 to version 2 to version 3? How are you picking up dynamically the changes that could be inflicted via a code change? So when you start putting in those data services and now you have an external source coming into your environment, like actually writing data into a MySQL database and onto a persistent volume claim, how are you managing that? That part of the data is not in your code. You can use code to deploy everything and you'll get everything up and running from a MySQL point of view. You can have MySQL pods, you can have that scaled accordingly to whatever you need. But actually the data that gets put into that's no longer in code, and that's an external data source that is being leveraged and being inputted into by either people within your business or people at least within whatever that service may be. So it could be your own internal people. It could be a wider public service that is being widely adopted out there. So from a code point of view, we're able to bring back all of the Kubernetes object, all of the configuration, all good. Like everything there, I'm not disputing that. But the persistent data is not captured in any version control or any code repository, which means we potentially have a problem. If that data is important, which I imagine it very much is, regardless of what that is, that could be login information, that could be databases, that could be anything. But this is where it's all about the data. And this is where, again, I strongly believe that by bringing that data management concept over to the left-hand side of the development cycle and incorporating that into your CI/CD pipelines, mostly your CD pipelines, this gives us the ability to have a bit more of an awareness of protecting that workload, or at least protecting that data. And it might be the DevOps engineer or the developer that actually incorporates this, whilst there is also an operations team or a DevOps team also incorporating this into their daily, their hourly backups as well. So what I'm talking about here is just a more dynamic way of being able to protect our data at more efficient ways in the process. So as I kind of touched on, any persistent data or volumes used by applications are not captured in version control. So any stateful service such as MySQL or a NoSQL system, and it's not being captured. So what we're going to be doing in the demo later is we're actually going to perform the backup action prior to any code changes so that we've got a good fast recovery point. Now for that recovery point, for speed in the demo, I'm just going to be using a snapshot, a local snapshot, a CSI snapshot, and that's going to give us a very fast recovery point. Now, in a real world situation, we might want an export action if we're going to be talking Kasten K10 terminology, and what that's going to do is export it out into a secondary location, whether that be an S3 location, whether it be an object storage, whether it be NFS, whether it be a Veeam backup replication repository, etc. But data and the dependencies of the stack need to be discovered, tracked, and captured by those actions, whether it's a backup or an export. So that's really what we're getting at. So just to quickly walk through what this demo is going to look like for the rest of the session, is we're going to set up, at the moment, we have a blank Kubernetes cluster. So the idea behind this is we're going to go and deploy Argo CD. We're going to go and set Argo CD up with our application, and we're going to deploy that application out. It's going to be a simple MySQL. It's actually going to be a pet clinic. So with a very tiny database with some pet information in there around like some data. And then with that, we are going to update that. We're going to add some data. We're going to create a config map, which is now where we're implementing a potential code plus data change into our system, which actually is, spoiler alert, is going to break our system, our data. Ultimately, it's going to be removing some level of data. But really, because we've had these pre-sync hooks in, we're able to have a capture of that data prior to that mistake being made. And then we're going to use K10 to obviously recover that data back into the environment and fix those mistakes in the config map and continue that on. So with that, let's jump into the demo. Okay, so in the demo, you can see here that I've pulled down the Argo CD get from my repo. If we go and just take a quick look at what that looks like, so this is a complete walkthrough. So it goes through installing Argo CD. It doesn't include the installation of K10, but there's plenty of resources out there that cover this as well. We're going to install K10. We're going to have K10 already installed. We're going to install Argo CD into our Kubernetes cluster, of which I'm also going to cover in this demo. Phase 1 is deploying the application, so from Argo CD. So remember, we're going to pick up that CD concept. We're going to pick up the application, i.e. from this GitHub repository. We're going to deploy the application. We're going to add some data to it. We're going to create the config map that interacts with the data. We're going to simulate a migration job of that data, and then we're going to recover that data, whilst also checking back into our K10 dashboard to understand what is going on. So before we jump into that, I don't need that just yet. Let's jump into code. And if we go up to the top here, so this is that same markdown that we have, but if I go and do a kubectl get namespace, you'll see here that we've got Kasten.io, but we don't have any Argo CD, and we don't have our MySQL namespace, which is where our application is going to live. So let's go ahead and start copying out some of these commands. So let's create our namespace. Let's go and deploy Argo CD, and once that takes a couple of seconds to come up, let's port forward that, and then we can get to that as well from our same browser. Now that's going to take a couple of seconds. In fact, this is a part of the demo before, so we can just use that same. No, we can't. Okay, so now let's clear this again. But if we go over to Firefox, I've also documented this in a blog that I'll link as well somehow, so that everyone can see that. What we want though is local host, and we want it to be, I believe it's 8080. And what this is going to do is allow us to get into Argo CD. Okay, so, and then we want the username and password, so we can grab that. By the way, I'm using WSL on Windows here. That's why I'm able to use the base 64. And let's take a copy of that password. Jump back in here. Admin lowercase, and then our password, sign in, don't save. And you can see here that here we have Argo CD up and running. If we take a look at Argo CD, get pods in Argo CD, you'll get to see that we've got our controllers, we've got our repo server, Redis, etc. But really in here we have nothing going on at the moment. Now when we go to deploy our new app could be called Pet Clinic. Our project is default. We'll leave it as sync policy manual because I want to show you every step of the way, but you could, if you're version 1, 2, 3 and these are happening regular, you might not want to manually have to come in here and sync that. Now I haven't created the namespace, so let's go ahead and do that. I also want to grab a copy of this, which is the GitHub repository. Let's put that in there as well. If I do that, we should capture everything in there. And Kubernetes cluster. Namespace is going to be called MySQL. And let's say directory recurse. Now, I know everything sits in base, so I think I can put base as well, but path and dot just gives me the ability to allow for any mistakes that I potentially make. so with that, that should be enough now to create our application. Now at this point, nothing's happened still. Not that. In fact, let's close some of these so that I can actually see. Yeah, nothing's going to have changed. So no namespace will be there. Nothing's been added to our system. Now, if we go and look here, this is what, so we've got our application, and this is what is made up of our application. We have a PVC, we have a secret, we have a service, and we have a deployment. So pretty simple stuff. It is literally just MySQL and a database within that. So we're keeping it relatively simple in terms of the demonstration. If I hit sync now, this gives us some additional options, but I just want to hit sync. I've done everything that I wanted to in the setup. But now if we go and check the namespace, you can see now that we've got MySQL. And if I do a kubectl get pods namespace MySQL, hopefully you're going to start to see a custom precinct job. And actually it's currently running. So if we go and now dive into Kasten's dashboard, you can see here that we've just taken a snapshot. Granted, there's no data in it, so it doesn't matter. But before we've even done anything, we're doing this custom precinct hook. And it's worth just showing you what that looks like in here, as to we're basically creating a precinct hook within our application that tells Argo CD, before you do anything else, I want you to do this. And they work in pre, post, and there's another one, but also in these waves as well. And you'll see that actually later on in the demo, we use a different wave as to when we're going to recover or at least do something with that data. So you can see here, everything is good. So we can see also back here is that we're still up and running. But now we've got our PVC, our secret, our precinct, our deployment, our job, etc. So if we go back to this and we take a look at our pods, we've now continued to go and create a pod called MySQL 659 random, but MySQL is now available to us. So we've deployed our application as per we want. So it's got a deployment, PVC, secret. We also use a precinct job with the corresponding SA and role binding, which is also in the backup repository. By all means, go through that, read up what we're actually doing there, but it kind of hopefully makes sense as to what we're doing. And at this point, we now want to, let's remember this is a pet clinic, so vets are creating the row of the animal, the data for the animal they want to operate on. So at this point, we want to add that data in. So this is simulating that external data source, and we're now going to start putting data into our database. Again, not controlled by version control. So let's just clear that. Let's connect into that. And let's insert some pet data. Let me just grab hold of all of this. So I'm going to grab all of this. So now we're inside the container. You can see that I've just added a new database called test. We're using the test. We've created tables for the pets. You can see that we've got name, owners, species, sex, birth, death, etc. Now we're exit. Now we're back into here. Okay, so at this point, we're still on version 1 of our application. But we want to create a config map that contains the list of species that won't be eligible for sterilization. This was decided based on the experience of this clinic, and the operation on this species are far too expensive. So we need to see here a link between the configuration and the data. So the code and the data. And it's very important that the configuration and the data are captured together. So what we're basically going to do is we're going to create this forbidden species config map that basically says any crocodiles or hamsters are off the table. They're out of our reach for any operations. Okay, so that's all good. We can go and do that right now. Let's go and create that file. And then let's actually add that to our... let's not do that. Let's say adding forbidden species, and then let's push that up into our And if we then go and check our Argo CD repository and go into our base, you're now going to see this forbidden species 15 seconds ago. But what that then means, if I just refresh this, you're going to see actually we're out of sync. So version 2 is now ready for the application. Now I'm simplifying this massively, but if we go and sync that, providing I've done everything correctly, that forbidden species will now get loaded into or get deployed into our same namespace. But before we do that, we're actually going to go and create a backup, because every time we want to commit a new change or a sync, I actually want to go and create a backup of our application or of our data. But actually what K10 is doing is capturing the whole data piece. Okay, so now forbidden species, everything all good. Let's head back into here. Let's clear this down. And you can see that we've got that second restore point, right? So we have now 2 restore points that we can deal with. So, okay, at this stage of our application, we want to remove all the rows that have species in the list. For that, we use a job that connects to the database and then deletes the rows. But we made a mistake in the code and we accidentally delete the other rows. And notice here, this is where we start to use the Argo CD sync waves, and we use 2, which makes sure that this job is executed after the Kasten job. So let's say this is what we want to do. We think that this code is absolutely the right code and we want to be able to run that. So let's take a grab of this. And bonus points if you can actually see the issue round about where I'm hovering the mouse now. Okay, so again, we want to update that into our live repository. So let's do it quicker here with the longest commit message out. Let's do that, and then let's do a git push. Okay, so then let's head back into Argo CD, and we should, if I refresh this, we're going to see that new migration job. And if I hit refresh in here, you should see, if we go and sync that, we should see migration job appear. So again, we're taking that pre-sync job. If we go here, we can see that all good, as if on cue, it's finished. And then we should see migration job here, look. But now if we go back into our environment and we do pretty much the same as what we did last time, but instead I'm just going to collect all of this code base and we go and check all of that, select from pets. Oh, all of our data is gone because we made a mistake up here where we actually said delete all of them. So I forgot to where species in species. So actually what we did there, and this is obviously a simple, quick and dirty way of showing how code can manipulate data and why you should need that protection in there. So, okay, at this stage we could roll back our Argo CD to a previous version. Great. We probably should. But you're going to notice that it's just going to bring back our configuration. It's not going to bring back our data. It's not going to bring back anything in that MySQL. But luckily, we've been using the pre-sync hooks. So what we can do here is we have the ability to head on into Kasten K10. We can go into our application. We can go and find our restore point. The most recent one, you can see that they were quite regular. And we can choose to restore that. Now, I'm not going to go through that because of time. But basically what we're going to see here is if I go back and let's do an exit, because that will have thrown us out anyway. There you go, it's thrown us out because something's happening. And if I do a get pods minus MySQL, you're going to see a restore process actually happening in play. In theory, it should start. So let me just check. So the restore is happening. Good stuff. That's a good start. And here you can see that we're creating our MySQL from our restore. And as soon as that's running again, we can then go and take a look at the recovery. But then what we need to do is we obviously need to go and fix our code. That migration data job that we created here is bad. It's bad code. And if we just sync again, it's going to do exactly the same again. It's going to manipulate that data, and it's going to end up being bad again. It's going to end up being in a loop. So let's go and connect in again. Okay, all good. Our data is back. So making things right. Mistakes were made. Let's make things right. So by doing this and creating the good code and actually creating the file that we need, and let's do a git add migration data. Let's do a git commit minus m. Let's just use the same bad and then let's git push that up into our. Okay, so we've made right of our data. If we go back up here and you can see that it's already said that it's out of sync. So now let's sync that data again. Again, we're going to go and create a snapshot of that data, which could be an export in K10. So let's quickly run through that. We should see that. It shouldn't take too long. And then we'll see that same migration. And migration job appears because it's ultimately a new file. You can see that we've done that. So let's head back. Let's clear this again. Let's run this again for the last time to make sure that we have all of our good data. And you can see now, if you remember, I think it was crocodiles and it was hamsters. They've both been removed from that table. So if we go back up here, I'm sure it was somewhere. But believe me, if you went back in the video or you run through this, there's an extra 2 not showing, because our config map is now actually what it should be. Now, I'm going to end the demo there, but ultimately I've also included the way in which you can clear this up so that you can run this same demo in your own labs. But yeah, that was just a little insight into, yes, configuration is protected, but you also need to have that awareness of the data at the most earliest stage possible, because then you can stop things like this from happening. With that, thank you very much for attending the session. Hopefully it was useful. If you have any questions, then reach out to me at MichaelCade1 on Twitter, or find me on LinkedIn or any of the socials. Yeah, hopefully that was useful. Thank you.